So the event tonight is the 9th in a series of coffee nights about global issues. We've talked about everything from innovation in aid to sanitation projects, education in Afghanistan, and more. And you know, we often host events like this, although usually in person. So if you sign up for our e-newsletter, if you'd like to hear about future events or follow us on social media, you'll hear about that coming up. And I'll put those in the chat in just a minute so you can have those links if you need them. So for those of you who might be less familiar with MCIC, which is the Manitoba Council for International Cooperation, we're a council of about 40 organizations working in international development around the world. We also work to engage Manitobans on global issues, such as the important work you're going to learn about tonight. And this event is sponsored in part by funding from Global Affairs Canada, and we're grateful for their support. So I'll just launch this next survey question. How many of you have been to one of our local brews before? Maybe at, oops, sorry. I mean, where are you joining from? I'm getting mixed up in my notes here. So I'm gonna launch this and you can let me know where you're joining from tonight. Give you a few seconds to take a look at that. A few people left to vote. It's kind of fun watching the results roll in. Okay, so just 10 more seconds. Okay, so not that surprising. A lot of people are joining from Winnipeg, where we traditionally sort of host these events, but we've got some people from outside Winnipeg and the rest of the province and from other provinces. And I can see someone from outside Canada. So wow, we're getting really global with our global views tonight. So that's great. I'm gonna turn that off and just get started here. So what I'd like to do, thanks for everyone for sharing. What I'd like to do is just introduce Bella, and then she's going to get started and tell us all about her project. So Bella Lam is the Director of Programs at the Jane Goodall Institute of Canada. She has 2 decades of experience in international development. She's worked extensively with civil society organizations and state actors all around the world, including Latin America, Asia, and Sub-Saharan Africa. Bella supported local partners and communities with projects in different sectors, many sectors, including health, education, food security, livelihoods, community-centered conservation, and more. And her experience in program management incorporates a really strong focus on monitoring and evaluation, local ownership, gender equality, and she really promotes a rights-based approach to sustainable development. In addition to all of those qualifications, Bella holds a Master of Science in Environment and Development. And of course, she's going to tell us all about Jane Goodall Institute's work today. And I think I can speak for everyone that we're all looking forward to hearing more about these projects, and especially the project she's going to speak about tonight, which is supporting mothers and children in the DRC, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and how it's really connecting this idea of community with conservation. And I just want you to join me in welcoming Bella. And the way we're going to do applause tonight is if you could put a little plus sign in the chat box and send it to all panelists and attendees. Everyone will see that you're applauding Bella. So please join me in welcoming Bella with all your little plus signs. And Bella, I'm just gonna turn off my video and turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Grace, and welcome to this virtual Local Brews and Global Views. So as Grace mentioned, this is the first time, and JGI, or Jane Goodall Institute of Canada, we're sort of like the guinea pig. So please be patient with us as we go through this experiment together. As with most of you, if not all of you, who've been working from home or self-quarantine, this new world of online engagement is something that we're all trying, but also open up exciting opportunities and to engage with people that we may actually normally don't get to have a chance to communicate with. So as Grace mentioned, tonight we're going to be talking a little bit about one of our programs in Africa called Delivering Healthy Futures. Before we start, Sorry, I'm just going to tell you a little bit about who we are. So the Jane Goodall Institute of Canada, we are part of a global community conservation organization. Obviously, I hope most of you know who Jane Goodall, Dr. Jane Goodall is. She is an iconic person who's been championing for conservation of not only great apes, but also about protecting the environment and empowering people around the world to take actions to make this world a better place for people, animals, and the environment. So our institute is really furthering the vision of Dr. Jane Goodall and looking at how as a global community, we can tackle some of the world's actually toughest and most urgent issues. With the Institute here in Canada, we have been established here since 1994. We're located, our head office is located in Toronto, Ontario. With the partnership with the University of Toronto, we're actually based out on the downtown campus, which is where I am tonight. So the Jane Goodall Institute of Canada has two main program areas of focus. One is domestic, a program we call Roots and Shoots, which focuses on empowering young people all the way from elementary school age to post-secondary, young people to make a difference in their own communities, looking at how they can take actions locally while thinking about global issues. And our second program is the one that we're going to be talking about tonight, which is our Africa programs. And that is an approach of what we call community-centered conservation. And what that is looking at how we can further our mission of protecting endangered species and their habitat by also looking at how their health, the animal health and the environmental health are really closely linked to also human health and human well-being. So our focus in terms of the communities we work in are really looking at people that are living and sharing the same habitat as some of the endangered species, including great apes, and some really fragile ecosystem where we recognize that without authentic partnership with community members who are living in those areas, we can't really have meaningful conservation efforts. So that is the Jane Goodall Institute's approach to how we tackle this interconnected problem and issue that affects not just one aspect of the ecosystem, but looking at it in a more holistic way. And I'll come back to this at the end of the presentation in terms of how this interconnectedness is really relevant in the current situation when we're facing a pandemic. But before we get started to talk about the project Delivering Healthy Futures, just want to get a sense of maybe what this audience knows about the DRC, the Democratic Republic of Congo, which is where our project is situated. So yeah, Grace is just putting a poll up right now. So please take a look at the three options and looking at the statement that you think is not true. So I'll also read them out for the audience. So DRC is where the first confirmed case of Ebola was discovered. That's the first option. Or DRC is where the second biggest troop of Canadian peacekeepers is currently stationed. That's your second option. And the third and final choice is DRC is where the third largest rainforest in the world is located. So take a moment and choose one of the three options, the one that you think is not true about DRC.
I just wanted to say we're at about 50% of people responding, so we're just to give it another minute or so. I'll give you I'll publish the results when we have all the votes in. Okay, we're pretty close, so I'm just going to give 10 more seconds and then I'll launch the results.
So I guess if I'm reading this correctly, Grace, I think the audience has said the number one answer is number two, right? That they think is not true. The second biggest troop of Canadian peacekeepers. The correct answer is actually number three. The correct answer meaning that's the statement that's not true. Sorry, I'm kind of doing the double negative here. So it is true that the first confirmed case of Ebola was discovered in DRC. It is also true that the second biggest troop of Canadian peacekeepers right now is currently stationed in the DRC. The largest right now is in Mali. And just as a sidebar, although that is the second biggest troop for Canadian peacekeepers, I think there are about 11 or 14, like it's anyways under 20 peacekeepers are stationed in the DRC. It is actually one of the largest UN peacekeeping missions in the world, with over 86,000 peacekeepers currently stationed. And it speaks to the fragility of the country, and which I'll talk about in a second. So the statement that's actually false is number three. The DRC, which is where the Congo Basin is the second largest rainforest in the world. The first being the Amazon in Brazil. So great, so that just gives you a little bit of fun facts about DRC. And in terms of our project and the context, I think it's important to just take a couple of minutes to describe the country where Delivering Healthy Futures is being implemented. So the DRC, for those of you who may not be familiar, it's sort of in the middle of Africa, if you will. It's kind of Central Africa. It is a fairly large country. It is actually the second largest country on the continent. And the size is roughly about the size of Western Europe. So it's not a small country at all. It spans, almost 2,000 kilometers from one coast to the not one coast, so from one border to the next. The project where we are currently implementing is actually focuses on in this smaller insert. It's in the eastern part of the country, in eastern DRC, and I've kind of got a blown up map here. This is also a part of the country that has experienced a lot of conflicts, internal political unrest for the last 15 years. Part of that is due to various power struggles within the country, but the reason why, one of the main reasons why there's so many incidents of conflicts is actually, you can kind of tell with the color codes. You see a lot of sort of greens and darker greens in this area. And these are all basically forested areas or reserves. Some of them are government-held areas, but they're quite dense, sparsely populated area, which has a lot of natural minerals and natural resources. So part of that creates an environment where, A, due to the remoteness of these areas, B, due to the ongoing political instability, there's a lot of armed groups. There are a lot of armed groups that are currently operating in and around these forests and national parks. One of them, this larger one here, is called Maiko National Park, and which is where this picture is taken. It's actually a partner with JGI, the Jane Goodall Institute in the DRC, and they work with us closely on conservation programs, but it also creates a climate where a lot of armed groups are in there to extract minerals, and if the lack of regulations in that country also fuels, exporting of conflict resources and fuel some of these ongoing fighting amongst the different groups. In fact, there are just in this area alone, so it'll be this tiny part of Eastern DRC, has probably over 50 armed groups operating at any given time. So what that means in terms of working on a project in a context like this is like the partnerships that we have with the community is key, and kind of goes back to what we talked about, our community-centered conservation, that we can't really do any of the conservation work without the communities on our side. One of the common questions we often get asked is, for those who have heard of the Jane Goodall Institute, their image is typically, oh, don't you guys work with chimps? What are you doing with, working on a health project? And it's precisely that holistic approach that I mentioned earlier. It's important to understand what are the needs of the communities, and we need to tackle that together with them and find local solutions before we can think of a bigger picture of how to protect the environment in that area. So just give you a quick overview of the Delivering Healthy Futures project. It's a 4-year project funded by Global Affairs Canada and also with the support of MCIC. We are actually now in our 4th and final year. We just basically wrapped up our programmatic activities last month. And there are 2 main areas of focus for this project. One is to strengthen the health system, the national and the provincial health systems of the DRC. And that we do that by building the capacity of healthcare workers, as well as building and reinforcing the rural health infrastructures. The second aspect is improving maternal, newborn, and child health practices, MCIC practices within those communities. So the things we're talking about is working with communities to make sure they understand what safe pregnancy means, targeting obviously pregnant women, looking at how we can improve childcare and both infants as well as infants, newborns, as well as children under 5, and as well as working with communities and about family planning in terms of both looking at how to create a more healthy households when women have access to family planning resources, as well as talking about the bigger picture of population pressure in a fragile ecosystem. And all of that is done through community engagement, by working directly and speaking to the communities and identifying what their needs are. So giving you just a little bit of context of what it looks like to actually work in that area. So as you can see, is maybe I just point to the picture here on the top left corner. There's an aerial shot as a helicopter is flying over the province where we are operating in. As you can see, it's sort of surrounded by densely forested area. It's fairly remote. In some of the communities, it takes basically a helicopter ride, 4x4 through some fairly dodgy roads sometimes, and then taking also these kind of handmade dugout canoes and a motorcycle to get to the final destination. So some of these communities are, they've really benefited from a project in the sense that they are so remote that it's not easily accessible, and they're not the first places that the government, even the government themselves, think of when they're trying to reach out to those communities. This is actually was taken this past year when myself and another colleague was in the DRC. We actually crossed this bridge going into the field, but while we're in the field, we discovered that the bridge actually collapsed. And so we had to find a workaround to get back onto the other side of the shore to get back to the field office. And one of the things that is really proven to us, just as one of the many examples, is the resilience of the local community. Literally within 2 to 3 days of the bridge collapsing, small business kind of came up with the idea of doing these kind of water taxis, these dugout canoes to ferry people back and forth. There were sort of pop-up food stalls that basically all of a sudden appeared on both sides of the riverbanks as they realized that people are waiting there for hours to try to get across. And it speaks to how quickly communities and the local people can adapt to the situation, but it also speaks to a fragility. Most people they're not operating in the formal economy. They really rely on small scale kind of cottage industry type of businesses, and a lot of them are actually farmers themselves. They grow their own food. So again, when you have a breakage like this and a breakage to the transportation system, it actually temporarily also increased the prices. Even within, and the bridge was actually rebuilt within a few months, but even during that short time, we saw a spike in food prices as they couldn't bring goods across from one end to the other. So again, I think it's important to bear that in mind, and we think of rolling out a health system where we're talking about vaccinations, where we're talking about increasing visits to health centers where the resources are often not there. A project like the one that we are providing often it throws a lifeline to those communities. And the idea of why we work with government partners is recognizing we as a NGO, a non-governmental organization, can't be there forever. So we need to build up the local infrastructure to make sure that they can carry on the work after we leave. So here are just some quick before and after pictures. So the project has an infrastructure component, as I mentioned, where we built new maternity wards. And here's a photo here of the type of building that was there before for some of these centers. And this is a picture of a new center we constructed with funding from the project. So in total, we built 7 of these centers in 7 different villages. And for one of them is the one that I mentioned as most remote, where it took several modes of transportation to get there. We were told by the community leaders when we visited after the construction was finished that this was their first new building that has ever been constructed in the village since independence, which was 1960. So that was a real wake-up moment for us in terms of how important some of these resources that we've been able to provide to these communities through this project. Another example is we provide a lot of materials, medical materials, equipment, and medicine as well. So for example, this is a picture of old maternity ward in terms of the medical beds that they have. As you can see, is very rudimentary. And this is a photo we took of the new one that in one of these centers with obviously much better setup, much proper beds with bed nets, because aside from building just the infrastructure, is also obviously properly equipping these health centers. And at any time, if you think of questions, I know your mic's mute, but feel free to, either in the chat box or in the Q&A, start throwing in the questions, and I'll try to answer them after. Just giving you a sense of some of the results we've been able to achieve for the past 4 years. As I mentioned, we were able to construct 7 new maternity wards. Training healthcare workers is a really important aspect of the project, because we know that the healthcare has to be delivered by skilled healthcare workers, and they're the frontline workers that we see in terms of the first line of defense when there are health crises that spring up in these communities. So we were able to train over 225 healthcare workers. The current COVID-19 situation really brings to light the importance of having a strong system where our frontline workers are well supported and have the capacity to do their work. At the same time, the resources for the government side are really stretched in these communities. So we actually really have to work with the community members as well. We also provide a capacity building for 120 community volunteers. And these are the people that are actually helping us to spread the message. So for example, when we're giving a message about the importance of prenatal care, or the message about importance to bring your kids for vaccination campaigns, we don't just rely on the healthcare workers in the clinics to give that message. We actually spread that out in the communities themselves by training these volunteers, and they themselves are telling their neighbors and the other people in their communities why it is important to participate in this program. So overall, we have over 12,000 pregnant women during the last 4 years who have received at least 4 prenatal consultations. And that is a significant achievement, because for a lot of these women, oftentimes they don't even go to the health clinics. Part of it is access, part of it is awareness, and part of it is just they don't necessarily have the time. And so part of our training in terms of sensitizing the community is not just to tell the pregnant women that, hey, it's important for you to have prenatal care, but we also target their partners, their husbands, community leaders, religious leaders, and talking about why it is important to support the mothers or support the pregnant women, to make sure that they have a safe pregnancy, to make sure that the whole household and the whole communities, everyone's on board, to give the women the space and the time to go have her prenatal checkups. During the same period, we vaccinated over 16,000 infants from 0 to 11 months. And just want to take a second to explain the kind of vaccinations that we do. So the government of the DRC have their routine vaccinations, just like every other country, their vaccination schedule. So the added value for the project is actually we worked with the Ministry of Health to look at pockets of communities that are really remote, where they actually haven't had opportunities to get vaccinated for the children or the infants. And we sent out the community volunteers who go into these villages to identify infants that actually have essentially fallen through the cracks. So rather than duplicating efforts that the Ministry of Health they're already doing, we're targeting pockets in very remote communities where they haven't had a chance to hear about the vaccination campaigns. And the 16,000 that you see there, that's all those infants are from those pockets of remote communities. And as I mentioned, family planning is an important component of a maternal, newborn, and child health, both in terms of teaching women and their partners about child spacing, as well as the importance of why having fewer children is actually important not only for the mother's health, but for the household as well, in terms of the number of children they have to care for and have to feed. So statistics, is important in the sense that it gives us a chance to track, our progress. It tells us whether or not we've hit our targets and how we've spent the donors' funds. But what we find that often is more compelling and what sticks to people's minds are not these numbers, but are really stories. So I'm going to take me a couple of minutes just to tell you one of the many stories that we've encountered during our time in the DRC. And want to introduce you to a woman named Valerie. So Valerie is from one of the communities. We're working in 20 villages. One of the 20 villages called Mponyama in Eastern DRC. So the first time I met Valerie was back in October of 2017. And this is Valerie up here. She was at the time 3 months pregnant. In fact, I didn't even know she was pregnant until after the fact. But she came to one of the sessions that we had, and I sat in on one of the information session that the clinic was hosting for the community. And we pulled her aside. We're just trying to get some information from different community members to get a better sense of what they think the needs are, to make sure that our projects, is targeting the right community members and responding to the right kind of demands. So Valerie at that time told us that that was her, she's already had 3 children. This was her 4th, but she learned from coming to the clinic that it's important to about child spacing. So she told us that after this child, she doesn't want any more children because she recognizes that it's important for her to have enough resources to care for her, the children that she currently have. And that she also talked about the importance of convincing her husband to come to these sessions. So it was great to just get to know Valerie and hear about her story. And she's also a teacher in her, she's an elementary school teacher in her own community. So again, just targeting these really key people in the communities who can further the messages that we are spreading. So the next time I visited the DRC was in February 2018, and I happened to ask, oh, hey, do you think we can try to find Valerie again? I want to check in and see how she's doing. And it was just by luck that, well, not by luck, by chance, that the clinic where we visited, Valerie was actually there. And it's kind of a good news, bad news story. So Valerie was there because she actually had malaria. So as you can tell, she put on a brave face, and I did ask, oh, is it okay to still take your picture? And she said, sure. She was still excited to get her picture taken. But then she told us that, you know, she felt really sick, but because she knew about the importance of going to the doctors if she's not feeling well while she's pregnant, and the danger of diseases like malaria for pregnant women, because she got that message, she went to the clinic. This is the head nurse in the Mukonyama clinic. She was kept overnight for 2 nights. She received treatment, and the day that we saw her was actually a day she was going to be discharged. So she actually got better with the medication that she was given. So the next time we saw Valerie was actually just last year in April 2019 when we visited again. So at this point, Valerie had given birth to a healthy baby boy. His name is Itutu Pascal. That's the name she's given him. And this picture is actually when we were interviewing her. She was you know, actually nursing Itutu Pascal. She's speaking to us, and she talked about how she's, you know, making sure that Itutu is being vaccinated, and talking about, you know, some of her hopes and dreams for her children. All of her school-age children are actually attending class, which is great. She's sending that message to her kids that it's important to go to school, as she's also, as I mentioned, as a teacher. So having a project that spanned the scope of 4 years allows us to kind of hear these stories from community members and really kind of follow their journey as well. And they've also taught us a lot about what's worked about the program, what hasn't worked, what we need to improve. And so it's another reason why, you know, we don't just collect the numbers and the data, but we also try to speak to as many community members as we can. So that's about wrapping up our my talk this evening, but I just want to ask another question before we wrap up. We talked a lot about, you know, in terms of the fragile state, the fragile country of DRC. A part of it is because it's in an area with a lot of natural resources, but it's also a biodiversity area where there's a fragile ecosystem. So just want to get this audience feedback on what do you think is more valuable in terms of what's in the Congo Basin? The biodiversity that supports endangered species, or the minerals like coltan that power our devices, such as the devices that we're all on tonight, right? To our computers, our phones, and just to say there's no correct answer, this is really just kind of an opinion and taking a poll of what people think.
Just a little polling update. We're at about 65%, so we'll give another minute or two.
That's great. So I've seen the poll, result just came out. So about 71% feel like the Congo Basin should be valued or should be valued more for its biodiversity, and 29% to say that the minerals like coltan. And as I said, there's no right or wrong answer. Really, I think want to kind of highlight that there is no black and white when it comes to dealing with a complex issue like biodiversity and climate change, and how do we look at supporting communities, livelihood, for example, health, as well as environmental health. And it's really many gray areas, which makes the work challenging, but also important in the sense that if there are easy solutions, the problem will be solved already. But it's really pointing to that we need to continue this dialogue, and that they are finding ways that how we can do things better versus like one is right or wrong, because like I said, it's really a gray area. So I just want to close out the talk tonight by putting it a little bit in context of the current situation. So what does delivering healthy futures, what does that even really mean in the age of pandemics? So we've seen how the COVID-19 virus kind of started from one country and has quickly spread to pretty much every corner around the globe. And I think it brings back to my original message about the community-centered conservation approach. And in some circles, they call it the One Health approach. So looking at not only how, almost thinking about ourselves, our human health, but that we can't really maintain a healthy community, so a healthy global community, without also looking at how animal health and how the ecology and environmental health, because they're all interconnected. As we see from COVID-19, it's actually a zoonotic disease, which means it's something that jumps from one species to the next, where there's crossovers between wildlife and humans. Another one's Ebola, which is also prevalent in the DRC. So what it means when we kind of reflect on in this day and age of the pandemics is there is really no security or safety for any one country to be immune to a disease like COVID-19 when we can't assure that there is strong health systems everywhere around the world and not just here in Canada, because of the interconnectedness of how we are connected to all the countries around the world with globalization. And so for our organization, for the Jane Goodall Institute of Canada, it's really going back to our mission and spreading that message of the interconnectedness, the holistic approach to looking at our ecosystem as a living, breathing space, a mechanism and space where not just humans are the main actors, but how we treat our animals, how we treat wildlife, how we treat the environment. It really comes back to our own health as well. What does it mean for our communities? We've seen, the COVID-19 again is a great example of how individual actions actually makes a difference. Like if we individually choose to stay home, individually choose to self-isolate or not engage in activities that could harm others, that actually is helping us to manage this particular pandemic we're facing right now. And even post-COVID-19, I think MCIC is a great example of promoting that think globally and act locally. For the Jane Goodall Institute of Canada, our Roots and Shoots program, it is anchored on that, how each individual and within our own community can take actions, and that can have a global impact on things such as climate change, for example. And the last thing I would just kind of leave you with is basically the philosophy in terms of what it means, the philosophy of Ubuntu, which is a South African philosophy that says, I am because we are. And again, it speaks to how I cannot just think about my own well-being or my family's well-being or my community's well-being or my country's well-being without thinking of how we are all in this together. So we'll end with kind of getting, again, one last feedback from you. So if you open a new browser, either on your phone or on your computer, and you put in www.slido.com, or you can just search in your search engine slido.com. You should come up with a website that usually is probably one of your top searches. When you get there, you would see an event or asking you to enter an event code. If you can enter JGI, all capital, as it says on the screen, and it would take you to a polling question of what gives you hope. And when you get there, it works best if you just type in one word. So think of a word or multiple words. You can put in more than one word, but a word that you think of that gives you hope right now. And if you have trouble getting onto Slido, maybe put it in the chat box and either Grace or myself can maybe help you out. But if you put in this URL, you should be able to get to the site where you can put in the code. And I'm just going to stop sharing the screen while you're doing that. So I think maybe, let me just see in the chat, but does anyone have, okay, you put in a Slido. So hopefully everybody's able to get onto Slido and then put in your code JGI all caps.
Looks like there's quite a few people there already.
Perfect, and I'm gonna share.
Give it another minute or take a question?
Sure, maybe just give like 30 seconds.
Sure.
Yeah.
I know we're asking a lot of you tonight. You're trying out Zoom, you're trying out Slido. So thanks to everyone who's figuring it out and joining us on there.
Yes.
And don't worry too much. You just stay here. We'll take questions in just a second.
Right. Okay, hang on 1 second. I'm just gonna. Okay. Let's give it a minute. Okay, right. Okay, I'm just going to take 1 second to show the results. Okay. All right, I'm just going to get back to the screen and share that.
So everyone, you just have another second to.
Right, and I'm just going to launch that. So you hopefully should be able to see the screen again. So here are some of the words that you have chosen. The words that are bigger means that more than one person or multiple people have chosen those words. So I think these are all great reasons for hope. Community, youth, education, children, women, optimism, compassion, kindness, friendship, solidarity, knowledge, my daughters, family, and solidarity, partners. So these are all, I think they all gives us a reason to continue to hope. And I think that's important to keep in mind, especially as we all have our, I'm sure, up days and down days all in our self-quarantine, and kind of remembering that the bigger picture, and that will come out on the other end of COVID-19, hopefully with renewed hopes. So Grace, maybe I'll turn it over back to you for if there are questions or.
Sure. So just encourage anyone who has any questions to pop them in the chat or the Q&A. You can look at the Q&A and sort of vote for questions you think are important. We'll try and get to them all. So maybe I'll just read the first one I heard in the chat, which was, is this project put on in partnership with the American branch or just the Canadian office?
Actually, that's a good question. So we do, as I mentioned, work collaboratively with our other Jane Goodall Institute chapters. So we're working very closely with our American chapter as well, because they are actually the head office for the chapter in the DRC. So the Jane Goodall Institute DRC office is one of their field offices. So although we work directly with the staff team that's situated in the DRC, they also have a linkage to the US office.
Thanks. Okay, we have another question from actually one of our favorite teachers. Mr. Lopak is online here. Hi, Kevin. He says, what advice would you give young adults wanting to pursue a career similar to yours?
Oh, interesting. So I think it's really important, right now you can't do it, but to actually go out there and especially for young people who are just starting out, to take overseas opportunities whenever they can. So at the beginning, oftentimes is kind of like an internship or volunteering, because I think having a solid understanding of what field work is like is important, and to figure out if that's something that's for you or not. I think also learning a second language is super helpful. Typically in international development, the languages that are most used is French, Spanish, Portuguese, and Arabic. Sadly, because of colonization, a lot of these countries, for example, in sub-Saharan Africa, there are, for example, a lot of West Africa, also in the DRC, and a few other spots where they do speak French. Spanish is another big language, obviously, in Latin America, and there are both in sub-Saharan Africa and, of course, Brazil, where Portuguese is spoken, but not as much. So I think having a second language is something I would recommend as well.
Great. So another question, are the healthcare workers that have been trained and the community volunteers, are they from the local community?
So the community volunteers are all from the local communities. As I mentioned, we work in 20 villages. So in each of the village, we have identified, they're usually community leaders that they have stepped forward, and we have decided to train them so that they can, like I said, be our partners and be our eyes and ears on the ground. Particularly for vaccination, as I mentioned, we're targeting some really remote communities. So it's the community volunteers who go in there to sensitize the communities and tell them about activities like a vaccination campaign. For the healthcare workers, they are local, but not always from that village because they are hired by the Ministry of Health at the provincial level. So they do move their staff around from one district to the next. And that is based on some of the policies and recruitment process of the ministry.
Okay, some great questions tonight. We have another question here. It says, I've heard the people in the DRC often have to relocate due to conflict. Has this been true in the areas where you're working? And if so, how has it affected your project?
Yes, so one of the things that with the armed conflicts I mentioned is displaced persons. I think over the past 15 years, it's been probably over 2 million people that have been displaced over the duration of more than a decade. Currently, there's still hundreds of thousands of displaced persons. Particularly in we're working in 2 provinces in Eastern DRC. In one of the provinces, there are displaced communities. What it means is they don't set up refugee camps as what you may see on televisions. They are actually pretty well integrated into the local communities. On one hand, that's good, but on the other hand, it actually creates a lot more stress on resources for the host community. So what that means is it has 2 kind of impact. One is we're seeing more numbers in our clinics because there's a population swell in that particular village. And a second thing is we're actually seeing on the positive side a spike in some of the humanitarian aid that comes into those communities by other NGOs or by the government. So that for those communities, sometimes they can get additional resources because of humanitarian aid that arrives because of the displacement.
Thank you. Thanks to, we stopped sharing the screen, so those of you who are having difficulty accessing the Q&A should be able to see it now. So thanks for letting me know that. We did have a question come in the chat during that time though. They were just asking, how are your partners doing during the pandemic? How's it affecting your work? Talk a little bit about that. Maybe you could share a bit more about how your partners are doing.
Sure. So our office right now in the DRC is closed, like the physical office. Most of the staff are working from home. And so in terms of programmatic impact, it's actually fairly minimal because, as I mentioned, we're in our last year of the project, so we're actually wrapping up. However, I think that what we've heard is in our field office in Goma, the city of Goma, which is the capital of the North Kivu province, the people are not really paying attention to some of the social distancing or some of the rules that have been set up by the government. And partially it's because currently most cases in the DRC have been found in Kinshasa, which is the capital, some close to 2,000 kilometers away. So it doesn't feel as present. Which is good and bad because I think there is a worry that maybe they are not taking it as seriously as they should. But officially, like the government has put out messages to say, stay home if you can, but they're just not enforced. But our direct partners have taken that, obviously, advice, and they are staying home right now.
Okay, thanks. I do have another question here. Someone asking, they would love to volunteer in some capacity overseas in Africa, but they have no technical skills like medical, teaching, etc. What advice would you give her?
So on the volunteering overseas part, as I mentioned, if you want to get into this field, it's really important to have that experience. Typically what I would suggest is there are volunteering sending agencies. I think some of them may also be members of MCIC. The most valuable volunteers, if I'm being honest, is actually those who can commit at least a year to 2 years to that. And there are NGOs, I mean, afterwards I can maybe send a link to some of the organizations for people who want to get more information. And that's because it actually takes a long time for a volunteer to get over the culture shock, understand the local context, you know, basically understanding how they can provide support. So if you're just going for a couple of weeks, a couple of months, it doesn't really benefit the local communities. So in terms of, in general, how to go about that, I would say if you can actually commit to a longer term period, it's way more beneficial for the host community. And I can share some websites of places where you can find out more information after. Maybe I can share with Grace, I think, who has all your contact information.
Sure. I did have another question. I think you've addressed some of them. I had a question, actually. You addressed some of them, but I was just wondering if you could just sort of summarize your thoughts about why it's important for the Jane Goodall Institute to focus on, you know, addressing community needs together with conservation. You talked a lot about that. Maybe just leave us with your final thoughts on that.
Sure. I think the fact that we are not working in silos, or that we cannot work in silos. And maybe I'll just give you an example. So, you know, for a mother who is thinking of how to, you know, feed her family that night, or for a mother who's thinking of they don't have enough resources to take a sick child to a hospital, for that particular woman, if the Jane Goodall Institute were to go up to her and say, hey, do you know that you should protect the environment, shouldn't chop down trees, or, you know, shouldn't engage in, trafficking of wildlife, that's not going to resonate with that person who has some very basic needs that needs to be met. And that's the main reason why we understand that we are not doing this work from Toronto, Ontario, Canada. The work needs to be done on the ground in those communities, and that means caring for the community members who are living and breathing the reality that's very different from, you know, what we are facing at here, for example, in our country. So it's just really understanding that we need to do the work within a local context, and it varies from country to country. but from all the countries we work at, is really focusing on the needs of the communities at the local level. And until you address that, we don't have a partner in conservation.
Bella, this has been really great. Thank you. And thanks everyone for those questions. I just wanted to mention quickly that we're hosting another Local Brews on May 21st with Seed Change. If you're like me and you're starting to think about gardening, this might be really interesting for you, sharing about how community seed banks are changing lives in Timor-Leste. So just sign up for our newsletter or follow us online. You'll hear about the next one coming up. But Bella, I just really wanted to say thank you. I thought this was really great, and you shared a lot of your experiences, and I loved hearing the stories from the field and really getting a sense for how you're responding and how your work is really connected between that whole conservation and community idea. So thanks, Bella. If you appreciate what Bella said tonight, I encourage you to put some pluses in this chat box. I see a lot of you doing that, our applause.
Thank you.
Say you should be receiving right about now an email from us through Eventbrite with a 2-minute evaluation form for our event. It's something that we use to report back to our funders and just learn from you about what you liked and didn't like, so we can get stronger each time we do this. And I just want to say thanks again to you, Bella, and thanks everyone else. And I hope you all have a really great night. Thank you so much.
You. Yeah, thanks for sharing the evening with us.
Yes, thanks everyone.
Thanks, Grace.
Okay, thank you.
Bye.